Is the situation in Mali. The agenda is adopted. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. Members of the Council have before them document S/21/750, the text of a draft resolution submitted by France. I wish to draw the attention of Council members to document S/2021/714, a letter dated 6th August 2021 from the panel of experts established pursuant to Resolution 2374 of 2017 on Mali, addressed to the President of the Security Council. The Council is ready to proceed to the vote on the draft resolution before it. I shall put the draft resolution to vote now. Will those in favor of the draft resolution contained in the document S/2021/750 please raise their hand? The result of the voting is as follows. The draft resolution received 15 votes in favor. The draft resolution has been adopted unanimously as Resolution 2590 of 2021. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned. The 8,844th meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is the situation in the Middle East. The agenda is adopted. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. Members of the Council have before them document S/2021/757, the text of a resolution submitted by France. I wish to draw the attention of Council members to document S/2021/707, a letter dated 4th August 2021 from the Secretary General addressed to the President of the Security Council. The Council is ready to proceed to the vote on the draft resolution before it. I shall put the draft resolution to the vote now. Will those in favor of the draft resolution contained in document S/2021/757 please raise their hand? The 8,846th meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is the situation in Somalia. The agenda is adopted. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. Members of the Council have before them document S/2021/760, the text of a draft resolution submitted by the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. I wish to draw the attention of Council members to document S/2021/723, the report of the Secretary General on Somalia. The Council is ready to proceed to the vote on the draft resolution before it. I shall put the draft resolution to vote now. Will those in favor of the draft resolution contained in document S/2021/760 please raise their hand? The result of the voting is as follows. The draft resolution received 15 votes in favor. The draft resolution has been adopted unanimously as Resolution 2592 of 2021. I now give the floor to those members of the Council who wish to make statements after the vote. I give the floor to the representative of China.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to start with this. China just voted in favor of the draft resolution. However, at the same time, China continues to have concerns on individual paragraphs. The text calls upon UNSOM to work together with the international financial institutions and to battle climate change through financing for development. This is inconsistent with the consensus as contained in the UNFCCC, which calls upon the developed countries to provide financial and technical support to the developing countries, and leaves one wonder if this isn't an attempt by the developed countries to shirk their responsibilities when it comes to climate financing. COP26 will take place in November this year, and China calls upon the countries concerned to fully undertake their due obligations and fully implement their pledges when it comes to climate financing. Furthermore, during the consultations of the draft, while members still had concerns on the text and were working hard to reach a consensus, the penholder hastened to put the draft.
Mr. President, would like to welcome your personal participant, the first Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs. Welcome to the President's chair. We'd like to say that the Russian Federation voted in support of the Security Council draft resolution on the extending of the United Nations Assistance Mission Somalia put forward by the UK. At the same time, and similar to what was said by the Chinese colleagues, we would like to express our regret having to do with the fact that the British side this year undertook insistent efforts to introduce into the document a whole number of additional language on the climate issue. We do understand that the droughts, the floods, the plagues of locusts, and other natural disasters in Somalia compound the situation in the country. At the same time, we see no reason to use the resolution on Somalia in order to enshrine in the Security Council mandate the activities on working on climate change as such. We think that it would also be incorrect to make the special political mission work on this, because this way her most topical issues are being diluted, and they are extending assistance to the federal government and conducting the most important elections, and also continuation of transferring the responsibility for security from Amazon to the national security forces. We are convinced that the issues of climate change is something that specialized bodies within the UN should be tackling. Involving the Security Council into this issue is not desirable and is counterproductive. We are also concerned by the continuing We need to take into account the specific features of the Somali society. Artificial recipes from outside will hardly be successful in Somalia. I thank you for your attention.
which has supported progress in Somalia's electoral process. The United States supports this resolution because tailored, appropriate support and assistance from UNSOM to the Somali people remains critical during this time of political transition. This is a moment of tremendous opportunity for Somalia, and we would urge the federal government of Somalia to continue promoting cooperation with the federal member states and to closely coordinate with all partners to ensure their missions and UNSOM's Let me end, Mr. President, by reaffirming that the United States is committed to promoting the security and prosperity of the Somalian people. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of the United States for his statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned. The 8,847th meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is the situation in the Middle East, including the Palestinian question. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite Mr. Thor Wennesland, Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process, to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of Agenda Item 2. I now give the floor to Mr. Thor Wennesland.
Of the Security Council, over 3 months have passed since the deadly escalation between Israel and militants in Gaza, and the situation remains tense. In response, the UN continues to engage with all sides to maintain calm and provide urgent assistance to the Gaza's residents. On 19 August, the state of Qatar announced a contribution of $40 million over 4 months to the UN to provide cash assistance to some 100,000 needy families in Gaza. I welcome Qatar's contribution to support vulnerable families, which comes in addition to the already $10 million per month that Qatar gives to provide the UNOPS program of supporting fuel to the Gaza power plant. These two efforts combined are vital to improving the dire socio-economic and humanitarian situation on the Strip. This support came following the UN humanitarian appeal in May and its call at the HLC technical meeting in July to the international community to work with the Palestinian Authority and the UN on implementing a robust program of humanitarian aid and recovery for the Gaza Strip, developed in full contact with the reiterating that further contributions are urgently needed. Mr. President, concerning level of violence continued throughout the occupied Palestinian territory during the reporting period. In Gaza, militants launched incendiary balloons on multiple occasions and one rocket towards Israel. The rocket was intercepted, causing no damage, while the balloons caused several fires in areas around the Strip. In retaliation, Israeli Defense Forces fired some 37 missiles against Hamas targets, resulting in damage but no injuries. Tension along the Gaza perimeter reached a peak on the 21st of August when hundreds of Palestinians attended a rally organized by Palestinian factions. During the demonstration, hundreds of people approached the security fence, threw stones and reportedly IEDs towards Israeli security personnel. Israeli forces fired on Palestinian protesters, injuring 51 Palestinians, including 25 children, the vast majority due to live ammunition. One Palestinian man and a 12-year-old Palestinian boy subsequently died of their wounds. One Israeli soldier was shot by a Palestinian and later died of injuries. That evening, Israel launched 6 retaliatory airstrikes against what he said were Hamas military sites in Gaza. Another demonstration near the security fence east of Khan Yunis on 25 August led to another clash between Palestinians and ISF. 14 Palestinians were injured, including 5 by live ammunition. I reiterate that children must never be targeted nor put in harm's way, and call on all sides to show restraint, avoid provocations at the fence, and keep the protest peaceful. In the occupied West Bank, clashes, attacks, search and arrest operations, including in Area A, and other incidents resulted in the death of 9 Palestinians, including 2 children, and injuries to over 272 injured by ISF, with 1 killed and 226 injured during the reporting period. On 27 July, a Palestinian man was shot dead by ISF near Beitah. According to ISF, the man advanced towards the Israeli soldiers holding a suspicious object and ignored warning shots. The man, reportedly a water technician, was seen on video with a pipe wrench near a water pump shortly before he was shot. Israeli authorities said they had opened an investigation. On 6 August, another Palestinian was killed by ISF live fire in Beitah during clashes with ISF. On 28 July, an 11-year-old Palestinian boy was killed in Beit Umar after ISF fired at the car he was traveling in with his father and siblings. Israeli authorities have opened an investigation. The next day, ISF killed a 20-year-old Palestinian man amid clashes during the boy's funeral. On 3 August, 6 Palestinians were injured during the exchange of fire with ISF in the Jenin refugee camp in Area A of the West Bank, including a 25-year-old man who later succumbed to his wounds. On 16 August, 4 Palestinians were killed and another injured by live ammunition in an exchange of fire with ISF during the Israeli search operation in the camp. On 24 August, Israeli forces killed a 15-year-old boy with live ammunition during an arrest operation in Balata refugee camp in Nablus. According to Israeli officials, the boy had been threatened to throw a large object. A 15-year-old Palestinian boy was attacked in the northern West Bank, during which a group of Israeli settlers kidnapped the boy, tied him to a tree and brutally assaulted, cut and burned him. The boy, who was conscious, was eventually handed over to the Palestinian ambulance. I am deeply concerned by this hideous act, and I expect the Israeli authorities to undertake a swift, thorough and transparent investigation and ensure that the perpetrators are held accountable. I am concerned by the continued tragic loss of life and serious injuries in the occupied Palestinian territory. I note that settler violence against Palestinian civilians is recurrent in my reporting to the Council. Further measures must be taken to ensure that Israel fulfills its obligation to protect Palestinian civilians from violence, including by Israeli settlers and to investigate and hold accountable such display of anti-Semitism is unacceptable. I urge all parties to refrain from incitement and provocative actions. Mr. President, during the reporting period, Palestinian civil society organizations and human rights defenders continue to face restrictions on their freedoms of expression, assembly and association. On 29 July, ISF reportedly conducted searches of offices of the Bisan Center of Research and Development and of Defense for the Children International. Actions. I also urge the Palestinian Authority to immediately stop arrest of human rights defenders, journalists and activists on charges that impinge upon exercise of freedom of expression. Mr. President, Israeli demolitions and confiscation of Palestinian homes and other structures continue throughout the reporting period. Overall, Israeli authorities demolished, seized and forced owners to demolish 81 Palestinian-owned structures in Area C, 22 in East Jerusalem, displacing 165 Palestinians, including 33 women and 98 children. The demolitions were carried out due to the lack of Israeli-issued building permits, which are nearly impossible for Palestinians to obtain. On the 4th of August, 17 structures were seized in the Bedouin community of Ipsik in the Jordan Valley, displacing 27 people, including 19 children. The confiscation was carried out due to community's location in an Israeli-declared firing zone. On the 2nd of August, Israeli Supreme Court held a hearing to consider an appeal request by 4 Palestinian families facing eviction in the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood of East Jerusalem. The judges proposed a compromise which was not agreed, and the hearing was adjourned with no date to reconvene. On 15 August, the Supreme Court postponed the eviction of several other Palestinian families living in the same area of Sheikh Jarrah, pending a decision of their request to appeal the decision to evict them. On 11 August, the Jerusalem Local Affairs Court froze the demolition of several dozen structures in Al-Bustan section of the Silvan neighborhood up until 10 February 2022, pending planning discussions that are underway. I urge Israel to cease demolition and seizure of Palestinian property throughout the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem, in line with its obligation under international humanitarian law. Mr. President, returning to the situation in Gaza, I note a gradual and partial easing of the access restrictions by the Israeli authorities. On 29 July, the fishing zone was again expanded to 12 nautical miles after being restricted for 4 days in response to the launching of incendiary balloons into Israel from the Strait. On 13 and 26 August, Israeli authorities announced additional easing of import and export restrictions. For the first time in 18 months, permits will be given to 2,000 Palestinian traders and 350 business people to cross from Gaza into Israel. While some 6,000 trucks, including the construction material, food and non-food items, and fuel entered Gaza, the volume of trade still remains below pre-escalation levels. On August 23, for the first time in over 6 months, Egyptian authorities closed Rafah crossing for all movements, reopening it fully again on 29 August. Although movement and access into and out of Gaza should be further improved, no amount of humanitarian or economic support on its own will address the challenges facing Gaza. The current gradual approach is a holding operation and not a strategic way forward and a solution for the people of Gaza. Gaza requires political solutions that would see a fully lifting of Israeli closures in line with the UN Security Council Resolution 1860 and return of a legitimate Palestinian government to Gaza and the establishment of an independent sovereign Palestinian state on which Gaza is an integral part. I must also see Hamas and other armed groups stop the launching of incendiary devices, rockets and mortars, and end the military buildup. Mr. President, following the takeover of an UNRWA school by Hamas, the agency reiterated in an 11 August statement that its installations are inviolable at all times. The agency protested the takeover and condemned the existence and potential use of structure, including tunnels under its premises, in the strongest possible terms. While the school was subsequently vacated by Hamas, such actions undermine the inviolability and neutrality of UNRWA premises and compromise the safe return of children to their schools on time. UNRWA and Hamas are working to remove any remaining unexploded ordnances as soon as possible. Mr. President, the state of Palestinian authorities' finances remains precarious. While the monthly transfer of clearance revenue from Israel to PA occurs regularly, Israel continues to deduct an amount equivalent to what is calculated as paid by PA to families of prisoners and martyrs. These deductions, along with numerous other fiscal leakages, make increasingly difficult for the PA to recover its minimum expenditures, including salaries to government employees and social protection payments to needy households. I urge Israel and Palestinians to resolve the impasse of the prisoners' payment scheme and other fiscal leakages. And I call on donors to provide urgent financial support to the PA. On a positive note, on 29 July, the Israeli Minister of Health and Environment Protection met with their Palestinian counterparts for the first time in many years, amid an increase in engagement between Israel and Palestinian officials. On 29 August, yesterday, Israeli Defense Minister Benny Gantz met with Palestinian President Abbas in Ramallah, where they discussed security policy and economic issues among the aspects of the Israeli-Palestinian relationship. This was the highest level meeting between the two sides since the formation of the current Israeli government. This dialogue, and I encourage more ministerial level engagement, particularly to advance financial and economic cooperation. I hope that such contact can result in bringing the parties in a position to advance unresolved issues, including political ones, and including those related to the implementation of agreements made by the parties. On the 27th of August, the Israeli Prime Minister Bennett met with US President Biden. The two sides exchanged views on the efforts to advance peace, security and prosperity for Israelis and Palestinians and reaffirmed the importance of Israel's historic partnership with Egypt and Jordan, as well as its expanding relation between Israel and the Arab neighbors. Mr. President, turning to the region, in Lebanon, the government formation process has yet to yield tangible progress. The lifting of fuel subsidies on 11 August exacerbated fuel shortages, causing widespread disruption of service delivery. The situation in the UNIFIL areas of operation remains tense following the launching of rockets from Lebanon towards Israel on 4 and 6 August. The latter instance claimed by Hezbollah. Israel responded on both occasions with artillery fire as well as airstrike in southern Lebanon on the 5th of August. UNIFIL remains engaged with Lebanese armed forces and Israeli defense forces to defuse tension. On the Golan, the ceasefire between Israel and Syria has been generally maintained despite the continued volatile situation and violation of the 1974 disengagement of force agreement between the parties. On 17 August, UNDOF observed projectiles fired from west to northeast of their position strike location and heavy explosions on the Bravo side. UNDOF continues to observe the presence of unauthorized military personnel and equipment in the area of separation. Finally, Mr. President, demonstrable changes is needed on the ground, especially for the people living in the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem and Gaza. I remain extremely concerned of the dire financial situation facing the Palestinian Authority and its ability to withstand the ongoing fiscal and health crisis. This may affect all Palestinians. It's critical that the PA will be empowered to exercise its responsibility through the occupied Palestinian territory, including on reconstruction into the Gaza Strip. The Ad hoc Liaison Committee remains the established mechanism whereby the parties and donors can address relevant issues pertaining to economic situation of the PA and PA institution building. The next meeting of the HLC can work out plans for how outstanding issues can be addressed by the parties with support from the donors and the UN. I also believe that no positive, hopeful steps should be wasted, and despite the formidable challenges, we should help provide momentum to this renewed engagement. Nevertheless, serious political efforts are required to return to meaningful negotiations that will address all final status issues and achieve a negotiated end to occupation and the vision of two states, living side by side in peace and security, based on the 67 borders, in line with UN resolutions, international law, and signed agreement. In the meantime, Mr. President, both sides should abide by the signed agreements and avoid unilateral actions that change the reality on ground and undermine the horizon towards a two-state solution. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank Mr. Venslin for his briefing. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the Foreign Secretary of India. I thank Special Coordinator Tor Venslin for his briefing. I also note the presence of the representatives of Israel and Palestine in this chamber. We are concerned by the recent escalation in the Gaza Strip, which once again underscores the fragility of the ceasefire and the urgent need for addressing the underlying causes that have triggered the escalation. We call on all parties to the conflict to respect the ceasefire and refrain from acts that could exacerbate tensions and worsen the security situation. We recognize the efforts made by the United Nations and regional countries to prevent the hostilities from escalating into another military conflict. I reaffirm India's call for regular and predictable transfer of aid and other essential items to Gaza to ease the humanitarian situation and facilitate early reconstruction, as well as for appropriate use of such aid. It is also important that the international donor community supports the reconstruction of the Gaza Strip through the Palestinian Authority. We take note of the incremental relaxation of restrictions for entry of commodities into the Gaza Strip and urge the parties to work together to ensure timely access to such relief for the Palestinians. This would create conditions which would help in preventing another round of escalation. The recent agreement for the resumption of cash assistance to needy Palestinian families in the Gaza Strip is an important development, as it would provide much needed relief for these families. We also appreciate the work of agencies like OCHA, UNRWA, WFP to ensure delivery of critical aid to the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. The West Bank continues to witness incidents of violence and clashes between the Palestinians and Israeli security forces. Both sides must desist from provocative actions in the interest of peace and stability. We note the progress in the legal challenge to the eviction of Palestinian families in Sheikh Jarrah and underscore the need for respecting the historic status quo in East Jerusalem and its neighborhoods. We also urge parties to refrain from unilateral actions that undermine the viability of a two-state solution. Amidst these concerns, the decision by Israel to increase the number of work permits issued to Palestinians will help strengthen both the Palestinian and Israeli economies. Further, the recognition of COVID vaccination certificates issued by the Palestinian Authority and the facilitation of passage of patients from the Gaza Strip to the West Bank are also positive signals. India welcomes all measures which create greater opportunities for the socio-economic development of the Palestinian people. India's development cooperation with Palestine is also geared towards this objective. We have helped in building schools, setting up ICT and vocational training centers, a technology park, and a national printing press, and are supporting several other quick impact community projects in Palestine. High-level interaction between Israel and Palestine contributes to a better environment for the resumption of direct peace negotiations. We hope to see early commencement of these negotiations between the two sides, as they provide the best opportunity to resolve all final status issues and achieve a two-state solution. The international community, the Middle East Quartet in particular, has an important role to play in reviving these negotiations. Given our long-standing and firm commitment to the establishment of a sovereign, independent and viable state of Palestine, within secure, recognized and mutually agreed borders, living side by side with Israel in peace and security, India will remain fully supportive of all efforts to restart the peace process. I thank you. I will now resume my duties as the President of the Security Council. I now give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Special Coordinator Muslim, for your briefing and your continued efforts in the region. Mr. President, the United States is deeply concerned about the risk of escalation in the region, particularly in light of the recent provocations, including the use of incendiary devices along the Gaza border, which we have just heard about from the Special Coordinator. This latest violence has made it even more difficult to deliver humanitarian relief following the violence in May. The United States urges Palestinians and Israelis to refrain from actions and rhetoric that inflame tensions and further endanger the fragile peace of the last 3 months. That includes incitement to violence, compensating individuals who are imprisoned for acts of terrorism, annexation of territory, settlement activity, evictions, and demolitions. The United States is committed to a negotiated two-state solution. We firmly believe that Israelis and Palestinians deserve equal measures of freedom, dignity, security, prosperity. And U.S. diplomacy will remain focused on practical steps to advance that vision in the immediate term. Mr. President, we welcome the August 19th agreement between the UN and Qatar to resume aid to the people of Gaza in need, including the 100,000 families who will receive $100 monthly stipends through the World Food Program starting next month. This will give many in Gaza the means to get food and other necessities to survive. We would like to thank Qatar for its generosity. This new arrangement will ensure aid reaches those most in need and is not misused by other parties. While this aid will address the most basic daily needs of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, much more must be done to facilitate relief and recovery as well as economic development in Gaza. So, the United States calls on the UN and member states to redouble their efforts to help Gaza recover, including by facilitating regular, predictable access in and out of Gaza, with appropriate safeguards against the risk of diversion. In addition, following the U.S. announcement of another $136 million in humanitarian assistance to UNRWA's operations in the region last month, the United States again urges other member states to make financial commitments as well. As we saw with the recent return of 290,000 students to UNRWA schools in Gaza, UNRWA services are a lifeline to many Palestinian refugees. So we must work collectively to advance that agency's ability to sustain its core services over time. That includes making aid delivery more targeted and efficient. At the same time, the United States will continue to work with UNRWA and other donor countries to promote oversight and to ensure that the agency embodies UN principles like tolerance and respect. The United States also wants to recognize the visit of the Israeli foreign minister to Morocco this month, as the two countries upgraded their diplomatic relations. We certainly commend efforts to normalize relations between Israel, its neighbors, and countries throughout the Middle East. In conclusion, Mr. President, last week Ambassador Thomas Greenfield joined President Biden and Prime Minister Bennett for their first meeting. This was an important opportunity to reaffirm our mutual commitment to Israel's security and to forging a durable, lasting peace in the region. Together, let all of us work toward that shared commitment and do everything we can to bring peace and prosperity to the Middle East. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the United States for his statement. I give the floor to the representative of Tunisia.
Thank you, Mr. President. I welcome your presidency over this important session on the situation in the Middle East, including the Palestinian question. International resolutions. I would like to thank the UN Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process, Mr. Tor Wennesland, and all UN staff in the occupied territories for their efforts to enhance the prospects of peace in the Middle East. Mr. President, we convene today once again to deliberate on the situation in the occupied Palestinian territories and renew our positions supporting the need to end occupation and this protracted conflict. We convene to state once again that we categorically reject the expansionist settlement policies of the occupation authorities and their plans to annex land, demolish houses, displace Palestinian civilians, and tighten the blockade of the Gaza Strip in blatant violation of international law and binding UN resolutions. International positions support reaching a just, comprehensive and durable solution to the conflict based on international resolutions and the agreed-upon terms of reference for a settlement. Nevertheless, the occupying power continues to pursue oppressive policies, evading accountability and disparaging international law. In light of the continued flagrant human rights violations in the occupied Palestinian territories and attempts to impose a fait accompli, Tunisia once again calls upon the international community, particularly the Security Council, to fully shoulder its responsibility and compel the occupying power to respect its obligations under international law, international humanitarian law, and international human rights law. It should put an end to the violations, its expansionist plans, its settlement projects, and any unilateral action that would deepen the conflict, lead to further escalation, and undermine any chance to achieve peace and restore stability and security in the region. We call once again for ensuring accountability for the flagrant violations of international law that have been committed by occupation authorities in the occupied Palestinian territories for decades. We reaffirm the need to provide protection to Palestinian civilians from the violence by settlers, occupation forces that use excessive force and attack Palestinian civilians repeatedly. Mr. President, the situation in the Gaza Strip remains a cause for grave concern due to the blockade that was imposed more than 14 years ago and still persists, and the deterioration of the situation on the ground at multiple levels, especially following the latest Israeli aggression, which resulted in significant casualties and widespread destruction of infrastructure and properties. Given the deteriorating socio-economic and humanitarian situation, we call upon the international community to compel the occupation authorities to facilitate the delivery of humanitarian aid and refrain from obstructing reconstruction. We also call upon international donors to increase the level of assistance and humanitarian response in the occupied Palestinian territories and support relevant UN efforts. In this context, we stress the urgent need to fund UNRWA interventions. We emphasize the need to continue Palestinian reconciliation efforts, and we welcome mediation efforts supporting this endeavor. Mr. President, peace and stability in the Middle East can only be achieved through reaching a just, comprehensive and durable solution to the Arab-Israeli conflict according to international law and international resolutions. Any attempt to impose a fait accompli will not change this reality, will not alter the legal and historical facts, and will not break the people's determination to regain their legitimate rights that are not subject to any statute of limitations. Tunisia will continue to hold its firm and principled position in support of the Palestinian people and its aspiration to self-determination, ending the occupation and establishing its independent sovereign state on its territories based on the June 4th, 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. We are confident that concerted efforts by the international community, including the Security Council, the Middle East Quartet, the Secretary General of the United Nations, and neighboring countries can contribute to overcoming the current stalemate in the peace process and creating real chances for a settlement, which in turn can lay the foundation for stability and peace and security in the region. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Tunisia for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Mr. President, and my thanks too to Special Coordinator Wennesland for his briefing. Let me start by once again reinforcing the need to prevent a further escalation in the occupied Palestinian territories and to restore calm. We share concerns about the recent tensions in Gaza and call on all parties to take steps to avoid exacerbating tensions and to maintain the cessation of hostilities. The United Kingdom condemns unequivocally Hamas's indiscriminate attacks against Israel, including the use of incendiary balloons. We call upon Hamas and other terrorist groups to permanently end their rocket fire against Israel. Our attention must remain on the dire humanitarian situation in Gaza and the impact on Palestinians living there. It remains vital that Israel ensures regularized access into and out of Gaza in accordance with international humanitarian law, especially for humanitarian actors and goods, reconstruction materials, and for medical purposes. In the West Bank, we should all be troubled by the high number of Palestinians who have been killed by Israeli forces in recent weeks. Since our most recent debate on the 28th of July, 9 Palestinians have been killed in the West Bank, including 2 children. We urge the Israeli authorities to conduct transparent and comprehensive investigations and to hold those responsible to account. In regards to the handling of recent protests, we call on the Palestinian Authority to adhere to international standards of freedom of expression, association, and assembly, and urge respect for human rights. The use of violence against peaceful human rights defenders, activists, and protesters, and the mistreatment of those detained is unacceptable. In Jerusalem, we remain concerned by the high number of evictions and demolitions, including in Sheikh Jarrah, Silwan, and Al-Walaja. Unfortunately, in 2021, we have seen the pace of these unilateral Israeli actions increase across the West Bank. We urge Israel to refrain from actions which displace Palestinians from their homes, act as a driver for conflict, and are, in all but the most exceptional circumstances, illegal under international law. It is also vital to maintain calm on Al-Haram al-Sharif, Temple Mount, and to uphold the historic status quo. Mr. President, against this fragile backdrop, we continue to see signs of hope. We are pleased to see Palestinian and Israeli firefighters working together to extinguish fires in Jerusalem. We want to see greater coordination and cooperation between Israelis and Palestinians, particularly on economic initiatives, to help pave a pathway toward peace. The first anniversary of the signing of the Abraham Accords this month is a reminder that the advancement of peace is possible. We welcome and urge continued engagement between the new Israeli government and the Palestinian leadership, and call on both parties to work together to tackle immediate and long-term threats to peace and stability. Our collective goal remains a two-state solution based on 1967 lines. The United Kingdom stands ready to support. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for her statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Norway.
Thank you, President, and I thank Special Coordinator Wennesland for his briefing. President, the situation in Gaza continues to be volatile. There is a clear need for long-term solutions, first and foremost in the form of a solid and lasting ceasefire. We commend Egypt's ongoing efforts in Gaza. Let me also highlight a positive development. The MOU between Qatar and the UN to provide cash assistance to about 100,000 families in need in Gaza. We welcome the contributions from Qatar and the efforts of the Special Coordinator and his team. In addition to alleviating the suffering of the civilian population, such assistance is critical for securing stability in Gaza. For regional stability, UNRWA's continued ability to deliver essential services to Palestinian refugees remains crucial. We call for sufficient funding for the agency. Norway welcomes that Israel has lifted some restrictions imposed on Gaza. We call on further steps, including to increase the number of work permits to Israel for Gazans. The population of Gaza needs increased opportunities for economic activity, trade and travel, as well as genuine access to their fisheries. Furthermore, we urge all actors to contribute to de-escalation and refrain from actions and rhetoric that could inflame tensions. We expect groups in Gaza to uphold the ceasefire and attend to the needs of their own population. The people of Gaza will not live in peace unless their leaders embrace it. Still, only a broad political solution can solve the underlying problems of the conflict. We reiterate our call for a two-state solution on the basis of the 1967 lines, relevant Security Council resolutions, international law, and internationally agreed upon parameters. Mr. President, I would like to reiterate our concern for Israel's illegal settlement activities, demolitions and evictions. The proposal to build 9,000 new settlement units in Atarot would further isolate Ramallah from East Jerusalem. With other plans in the area around Jerusalem, these settlements undermine the prospects of a contiguous Palestinian state and a viable two-state solution. We are concerned about the rising levels of violence against Palestinians, particularly children, in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. Recently, there have been violent clashes around the village of Baita in connection to demonstrations against attempts to establish a new outpost nearby. We urge Israel to avoid the excessive use of force and to ensure protection of Palestinians against settler attacks. We reiterate that a strong PA is crucial for the delivery of services to the Palestinian people and development, both in the West Bank and in Gaza. A strong PA is one which is well-financed, well-functioning, accountable, and enjoys democratic legitimacy among the Palestinian people. Norway is also concerned about the treatment of political activists and demonstrators by the Palestinian security forces, including recent arrests. We call on the PA to uphold their human rights obligations, including to respect the freedom of expression and freedom of assembly. We commend the new Israeli government for resuming a broad dialogue with their Palestinian counterparts. We urge the parties to use this new momentum constructively to secure progress across a wide variety of outstanding issues. The financial situation of the PA remains precarious. It is necessary to significantly increase the tax revenues of the Palestinian Authority. There is also tremendous potential for cooperating on matters such as trade, infrastructure, water, energy and telecommunications. Furthermore, Norway calls on international donors to step up their assistance and contributions. These and other measures to provide tangible benefits to the people on the ground will be discussed at the upcoming AHLC ministerial meeting, which Norway will convene on 23rd September in New York. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Norway for her statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Vietnam.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank Special Coordinator Thor Van Esland for his comprehensive briefing. Mr. President, let me begin by expressing our concerns about the recent increase in violence across the occupied Palestine territory. The number of casualties is on the rise, with alarmingly excessive use of force against civilians. In August alone, as mentioned by Mr. Van Esland, several men and boys were killed. In addition, nearly 1,000 were injured in the West Bank. Meanwhile, the situation in Gaza remains very volatile and in danger of escalating into an intensified conflict due to continued violations of cessations of hostility. We are also particularly concerned about the risk of conflict over the holy site in East Jerusalem. If the status quo is not respected, clashes will be inevitably and may escalate into religious conflict. We believe that neither side benefits from such a scenario. Therefore, we call upon all relevant parties to exercise utmost restraint and continue to urge Israel to stop excessive use of force. Dialogue and negotiation must be the main path to a sustainable settlement. We welcome the recent dialogue and encourage party concerns to keep this momentum. We also urge all the parties to apply all necessary measures to protect civilians, especially women and children. Mr. President, the deadly violence and the risk of escalations only underscore the need for a permanent ceasefire. We welcome the mediation effort by international actors toward this end and call upon all party concerns to resume negotiation with goodwill. Without a permanent ceasefire and measure to uphold it, a new round of hostility is just a matter of time. Mr. President,